Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. A government advisor calls for lobbying reform as he finds that the boundary between civil service and private sector is not clear enough. And the super wealthy bought more homes in London than any other city in the world during the pandemic. Now we know more details for the funeral on Saturday of the late Prince Philip. The palace says that despite the adjustments due to the pandemic, the arrangements are very much in line with the Duke of Edinburgh's wishes. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us more.
The Duke of Edinburgh's ceremonial royal funeral will take place here in Windsor on Saturday inside the grounds of the castle. At 11 a.m, a bearer party from the Queen's Company, the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, will carry Prince Philip's coffin from the private chapel to the inner hall of the castle. The coffin will be covered by the Prince's standard, a wreath, his naval cap and sword. Only 30 mask-wearing mourners are permitted because of COVID-19 rules. These will include the Queen and all senior royals, including the Duke's children and grandchildren. At 2 p.m, the ceremonial aspect begins. In recent days, various military personnel have been preparing and rehearsing in readiness. Military detachments will line up in the castle's quadrangle. They are drawn from Prince Philip's special military relationships and include the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Grenadier Guards, the Royal Gurkha Rifles, the Intelligence Corps and the Highlanders. Then a modified Land Rover that Prince Philip helped design will enter the quadrangle. Buckingham Palace said the Prince started on the project with the Land Rover 18 years ago, with the hearse based on a Defender TD130 chassis and then modified, with the open-top rear section custom-made to the Duke's specification. All those in the quadrangle will give the coffin a royal salute before it is placed onto the Land Rover. The Queen will then depart from the Sovereign's entrance in the State Bentley. The procession will move towards St George's Chapel, through Engine Court, Chapel Hill Parade Ground and into Horseshoe Cloister, arriving at the West Steps. The royals who will follow on foot behind the coffin are Prince Philip's 4 children, Princes Charles, Andrew, Edward and Princess Anne, along with grandsons William and Harry. The minute guns will be fired by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery from the East Lawn of Windsor Castle throughout the duration of the procession, and the curfew tower bell behind me will also toll. The national anthem will play as the coffin arrives at Horseshoe Cloister, to be met by representatives from the Commonwealth and a dismounted detachment of the Household Cavalry. The Queen's Bentley will stop outside the Galilee porch, where she will be met by the Dean of Windsor, David Connor. The coffin will pause for the National Minute of Silence at 3 p.m. A gun fired from the East Lawn will signify the start and end. During the service, a small choir of 4 will sing pieces of music chosen by the Duke. Prince Philip's insignia will be positioned on 9 cushions on the altar. These are the medals and decorations conferred on him.
Insignia, orders, decorations, medals are a way that a country has of saying thank you and recognising somebody's achievements. The Duke of Edinburgh had, I think, 61 decorations and awards from 53 different other countries, and there simply just wasn't the space to have them all on display at the funeral.
At the conclusion of the service, the Duke of Edinburgh's coffin will be lowered into the royal vault. The Archbishop of Canterbury will pronounce the blessing and the national anthem will be sung by the choir. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, had been by the Queen's side throughout her 69-year reign. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Windsor Castle.
A study says Brexit has hit the UK's financial services sector badly, and more pain will come after the pandemic. Think tank New Financial says over 400 financial firms in Britain have shifted activities, staff and a combined £1 trillion in assets to hubs in the European Union due to Brexit. The study says over 7,000 jobs have moved from Britain or been created at new hubs in the EU. The researchers say the numbers are an underestimate and they expect them to increase over time. The EU has offered Britain little in the way of direct market access for financial services, which were not included in the bloc's trade deal with the United Kingdom from January. And in other news, 2 years since the Notre-Dame Cathedral was ablaze, restoration continues slowly. French President Emmanuel Macron renewed his pledge to rebuild the landmark in 5 years.
Flames ravaged through the centuries-old Notre-Dame 2 years ago, its spire crashing through the vaults below. The French president on Thursday visited the construction site on the cathedral's rooftop.
I think everyone today remembers where we were 2 years ago. Our emotion, the emotion of all Catholics, Parisians, and all the French people, in fact. And I think we see here that a huge amount of work has been done over 2 years.
He said he's impressed by the restoration work so far, renewing his commitment to reopen the cathedral by 2024. A promise he first made in a sombre address the day following the devastating blaze.
Nous rebâtirons la cathédrale Notre-Dame plus belle encore.
We will rebuild the Notre-Dame Cathedral even more beautifully, and I want this to be done within 5 years. We can do it, and here again we will mobilize.
It took 400 firefighters and 14 hours to extinguish the flames. The main bell tower and some priceless artifacts and relics escaped the destruction. The inferno melted scaffolding that was already put up around the spire. 200 tons of deformed metal had to later be removed from the cathedral structure. Restoration work has been fraught with delays. Works were also suspended following concerns over lead contamination, and progress was slowed down at times because of pandemic restrictions. Despite the challenges, 2 years on, a spokesperson says the monument is holding up during restorations.
Mise hors d'eau de la cathédrale, ça veut dire tout simplement qu'on va prolonger le parapluie.
We're extending the umbrella which protects some parts of the cathedral, but it doesn't protect the transept, the large opening where the spire fell and ripped open the vaults. So we will install an umbrella which will allow the protection of the cathedral from the elements and water during the restoration process.
Parisians remember the devastation on the day.
I felt a lot of distress because I really thought the cathedral would collapse. I witnessed the fall of the spire. And then the fire trucks started arriving one by one, and we started hearing the sirens. A lot of fear, a lot of anxiety.
I just kept thinking that this is going to be something that's going to be written in history books, and not just a religious thing, a world historical event. And to see it burning like that, it was almost like God was there with me, you know, standing next to us with us.
As the restoration continues, the memory of the blaze is still fresh in people's minds.
A government advisor has warned that there's almost no boundary between the civil service and the private sector. In the wake of the Greensill scandal, he calls for immediate reform.
Lord Pickles said urgent reform is needed on the vetting process for former ministers and top officials taking private sector jobs. Westminster's lobbying watchdog told a Commons committee on Thursday,
and I think part of the problem we've got is it just not being clear where the boundaries lay. In fact, I hope this doesn't sound rude, there doesn't seem to be any boundaries at all.
This week it came out that Bill Crothers got approval from the Cabinet Office to take employment at lender Greensill Capital in 2015. Crothers was at the time one of the country's most senior civil servants. Former Prime Minister David Cameron has also been involved in Greensill. He personally contacted ministers on behalf of the company via text and email. Lord Pickles said lobbying activities should be carried out in the open.
There's nothing wrong with lobbyists. What is wrong with unregulated lobbying, secret lobbying, people getting an undue advantage.
The government has launched an independent review into Cameron's and Crothers' roles. And at least 3 parliamentary committees will also conduct their own investigation into Greensill.
Despite the pandemic and lockdowns, figures suggest that the super wealthy bought more homes in London than any other city in the world. Transactions increased in the capital while sales in the usual top markets of Hong Kong and New York went down. Here's NTD's Jane Well in London with more.
The £10 million plus property market proved resilient in London despite restrictions and a pandemic. The ultra-wealthy were enticed to buy while prices were lower than usual.
During lockdown and very strict lockdowns, the inquiry levels were still quite strong. This was a great time to purchase a property in Prime Central where they've been looking for the last year or so. This is the time they act, rather than when the market's booming and prices going up.
Research from the estate agency Knight Frank found UK-based buyers made up a third of all super prime buyers in London, increasing from 12% in 2019, probably partly driven by the fact that the housing market kept running here during the recent lockdowns. The super wealthy bought a total of 201 super prime homes in the capital, collectively worth more than £2.7 billion. Transactions for super prime homes in London rose by 3%, while sales in Hong Kong fell by 27% and sales in New York fell by 48%. During the first quarter of this year, figures from London estate agency Benham and Reeves shows a 2% increase in demand for homes costing more than £10 million.
The interesting thing is on domestic buyers buying those properties. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they are British born and raised. That just means they might have a British passport and live here at the moment or are staying here at the moment, and they've deployed their capital to buy an expensive super prime property. And the thing that's interesting for those buyers is that they've been here. There haven't been the travel restrictions. So they've been here and they've been able to go around and look at what's in the market, and actually they've done very well because they've had the strength of their currency against sterling, especially the dollar, and it's enabled them to buy well in this market and had good choice with not a lot of competition.
The data shows that for the super wealthy, it's time to invest. Reports say that the property tycoon Nick Candy is putting his £170 million penthouse in Knightsbridge on the market. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
Italians can now ride a so-called COVID-19 free train. Passengers must show a negative test before boarding. They say they feel safer during the trip.
An Italian high-speed train carrying only passengers who have tested negative for the virus causing COVID-19 started running on Friday. It travels from Rome to the country's financial capital, Milan, the country's busiest route. Passengers must show a negative test certificate before boarding. They can do a free rapid swab test at a testing site at the train station on the day, or show a certificate from a test done within 48 hours ahead of departure.
I have done the COVID test, and I have to say that this Trenitalia initiative is really, really good, because they're letting us travel more safely. On the other trains, there are rules in place, but here with a negative test, you feel much more safe.
Anyone who has been vaccinated must still show proof of a negative test. Tickets need to be booked online, and passengers who test positive will receive a full refund. The train operator said the initiative could be extended to other locations once travel is allowed. Under current COVID-19 rules, Italians can only travel between regions for essential health or work reasons. Italian airline Alitalia last year started offering COVID-19 free flights for some domestic and international trips. Italy is keen to revive tourism, accounting for 14% of its economy. Lockdowns and other restrictions are having a devastating impact on the industry.
EU hopeful nation Montenegro has asked the EU to help out with its China debt on a national highway project. But the EU says it won't. NTD's Patrick Hayden has a look.
The European Commission says the EU cannot help EU hopeful Montenegro repay its debts to China, but it can help complete a highway project that started with a huge loan from Beijing. We spoke to a China specialist who was recently briefed by UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, along with recently China-sanctioned UK MPs. He says that US President Biden and Johnson are talking about a G7 free world alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Whereas Western countries in the past were principally concerned through their development budget in poverty alleviation, increasingly it's taking a geopolitical tilt. And it's having to because what the West is doing isn't occurring in a vacuum. Other countries are out there trying to bribe and buy off smaller countries in order to get their will around the world.
Armstrong says the free world option would mean developing countries wouldn't get caught up in bad contracts with China that end up as debt traps, as is the situation with ex-communist Montenegro.
When China comes offering these funds that are attractive, they're seemingly free to begin with, that hold the offer of rapid economic progress and development, you can forgive countries for taking them. But of course, China never gives anything freely.
He says if Montenegro defaults on their first Chinese loan repayment in July, it has serious consequences, giving China access to its land.
I think China would love nothing more than to have a significant real estate presence under Chinese law in the European continent. It would be a threat that strikes right at the heart of NATO. NATO, of course, being at its roots dedicated to upholding European territorial sovereignty. This would be a pretty stunning imposition on it.
He says Montenegro should be welcomed back into the European family.
And if the EU, and indeed if NATO, are serious about upholding European territorial sovereignty, upholding democratic values, upholding the rule of law and everything we stand for, it needs to step in.
He says the EU and NATO should help, even if it's financially costly to them. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
Still to come, the UK accuses Russia of a series of cyber attacks on British soil, and Russia's ambassador has been summoned. That and more when we return.